Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello welcomes you to our 2024 Idaho Legislative Preview. I'm Linda Engel, moderator of tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote active citizen participation in government. Tonight's forum is being aired live on KISU. Recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League. No part of this League-sponsored video production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League only permits audio and video broadcasts of this event in its entirety. The format for tonight will be as follows. I will call on each panelist in rotating order. They will have 1.5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we will begin with questions. Panelists will have 2 minutes to respond. Panelists, please mute yourselves when you're not answering a question. All questions were sent previously to our participants. We will not be taking questions from the audience this evening, and viewers are muted. Our panelists will respond to questions until about 8:25. Tonight, we are hearing from Senators Jim Guthrie and James Ruchti, Representatives Dan Garner, Dustin Manwaring, and Nate Roberts. Representative Rick Cheatum has a conflict this evening and unfortunately will not be joining us. Let's start with your personal perspective. What do you see as the greatest opportunity in the upcoming legislative session? What do you see as your biggest challenge, and what are your goals? You'll have 1.5 minutes, and let's start with Senator Ruchti.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. We appreciate you putting this on, the League putting this event on that gives us a chance to sit down and kind of think a little more deeply about the issues that are going to come up. I think this is going to be another interesting session. All of the sessions have been interesting lately. And I'm really hoping that we can build on some of the things that we did for public education over the last few years. We had the governor's launch program that I believe everybody on this call supported in an effort to try to get ourselves out of a abysmal approximately 40% go-on rate for our high school seniors. So that was a great effort. We increased teacher pay. In fact, the average teacher's salaries have jumped by about 9.1% across the state. We just saw that data come out. So we did a lot of good things for education. But I worry about what's coming this year, and we'll have a chance to talk more about that. I think the other thing people can keep an eye on is I'm not saying anything that people don't know, but there is an extreme right-wing element in the legislature. None of the members here are part of that, but it has an
Yeah, thank you, Senator Ruchti. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you and good evening. Good evening. It's great to be here and appreciate the League's involvement in political and legislative issues. And thank you for the efforts that you all do. You know, when you look at the question, in a sense, the three things can be characterized for me in one sentence. A goal is an aspiration to solve a problem, and being a lawmaker gives us the opportunity to address the policy needs of our districts and state. And this year, there will be no shortage of problems to try to solve, but you got to remember that sometimes it's just as important to stop bad legislation as it is to pass something we think is good legislation. Just a few of the things I think we'll be looking at this year is the stability and direction of education savings accounts, school vouchers. We've all heard about that. Varying perspectives on higher education funding and the Idaho Launch Program, and if that continues, and to what level. There's some pressure out there to make some modifications of that. Water is a big issue with water shortages, fights between surface and groundwater users, which have resulted in curtailment orders and uncertainty for agriculture and how we manage the explosive growth in the state, and that additional pressure that it puts on our water resources. We need to, on the budget, we need to be able to financially transition successfully to what will be the new revenue equilibrium in the post-COVID environment after recognizing that 18 billion come into Idaho during COVID. It created a kind of a false sense of economic well-being. And make no mistake, Idaho's economy is strong, but we need to make sure our future spending decisions are not based on.
Yeah, please keep an eye on the chat so we know where we are. Representative Garner.
Yes, I'd like to take a minute and just thank the league for inviting me to this forum. I really appreciated it, and it was very educational for me last year, and always a pleasure to be invited and join in. The one thing that I did learn last year was that if I predict what the legislature is going to do, I was always wrong. But I think you will probably see something along women's health. That's an issue that is very prevalently being pursued in the legislature. I'm sure we'll look at that. School facilities. We did a lot for funding education last year, but I'm sure we will check up on the facilities, and the buildings themselves are getting dilapidated and run down. So how we approach that, I don't know, but it'll be fun to look at the ideas that come up through the legislature, and we'll find a good one. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity also to be here tonight with the league and the forum and the ability to share some thoughts about the upcoming session. I want to talk about the revenue a little bit for this session. We're entering into a session where our revenue for this last fiscal year is tracking down a little bit. If you break it down, our individual income taxes are up just slightly, sales taxes down just slightly, but corporate income tax had missed pretty big. 34% down from what we expected it to be. We're looking back at about what we were at the 2021 levels, and I think that is some of the resetting that Senator Guthrie referenced before we really entered into that COVID era. So we're going to have some, a little bit of tightening from what we've seen, I think, the last couple of sessions. I do think we are going to have commitments that we're going to have the opportunity to follow through on. The third tranche of the transportation funding for bridges in particular, I'm looking forward to supporting that. It's another $200 million to finish our commitment on some of that transportation infrastructure. I think there's going to be a large debate on another how we're going to continue to fund public education, if we're going to do school modernization and put money into facilities, and whether we can create a fund that helps schools bond off of that. And I'm going to be looking personally at some data privacy legislation. So those are just a few topics, and I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Representative Roberts.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the league for putting this forum on. It's a great opportunity. It's good to go last. There's so many good things have been covered already. One of the things that I've learned in my first session in the legislature is that we're really there to support our citizens of the state of Idaho and to provide an opportunity for, our children to move forward in their future, for our elderly to move forward as they, move along in their life, and to take care of our citizens. And really, I see the opportunity in our state government to support that, either through education funding or through our healthcare system, in supporting either Medicaid or finding ways, as we have in the health and welfare committees, to move along in our value-based care system that Medicaid's working under, and that kind of prioritizes value over volume for our healthcare system. And that is one of the opportunities that I've had in the legislature, is to support that system, to find ways that we can improve our healthcare in the state of Idaho and support our citizens. And those are going to be some big topics in our session coming up, both the Medicaid funding, or health and welfare direction, and education. And as a supporter of the Idaho launch, I'm very proud to see how that's working out, and I'm seeing that we're going to do well in providing an opportunity for our kids in the future and working people in the future too.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate all of your opening statements, and let's move on to the questions. So the first one is about parental rights and education. The Idaho Constitution requires a general, uniform, and thorough system of free public schools. Non-public private schools have no academic or fiscal accountability. This is a two-part question. How do you intend to support both the majority of Idaho families whose children go to public schools and the minority of families who would like taxpayer dollars to be used to fund non-public schools? That's part one. Part two is, how will your plan follow Idaho's Constitution? Let's start with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. And before, the timer wasn't working, so I apologize. As far as the 2/3 threshold, I'll talk about that first. I think given the proper election timing, I think the 2/3 threshold is too high. If the election was held for a school bond during the general election, where the turnout is highest, then I think like a 55% threshold would be sufficient. And of course, that would take an amendment to the Constitution. I know others are working on something similar to that, and I am as well. And so if I concur with the ideas and percentage thresholds of other lawmakers, then I think maybe a change is something we could seriously look at, remembering that citizens would vote on the change via a ballot question. And while the legislature requires 2/3 vote in both the Senate and the House to put it on the ballot, once there, it only takes a simple majority to pass. And as far as funding for education, House Bill 292 is an effort to move in the direction of property tax relief, and we may see further efforts to enhance that policy direction. You know, I think sometimes in Idaho, we are inclined to beat ourselves up about shortchanging education, and we can argue all we want on how we spend that money. But it doesn't do us any good to have the Taj Mahal for kids to go to school in if we don't have good instructional personnel. And in recognition of that, and I think Senator Ruchti mentioned, last year alone, the wages for classifieds went up significantly, and teacher salaries were increased by 9%, over 9%, resulting in a $6,000 increase. So that's certainly noteworthy as well. And while more can be done in education, we certainly have done a lot in the last few years.
Great, thank you. Representative Garner.
Yes, I also am interested to see what House Bill 292 does as it proceeds through the next couple of years. It set up a fund that helps fund the education, and it tied it in with sales tax, which is concerning to some, but I'm curious to see what happens and how that shakes out in the long run. Each district is different. Yeah, we have some districts in the state that couldn't pass a bond or a levy if it was 20%. And then we have some districts that even the 2/3, they pass them continuously. I think what we need to do is look at that and see what's the different driving factors in those communities. Why are some residents in favor of spending on education and some aren't? Is it a fault of the school district in that situation, or is it that they don't have the money and funds? The other thing that I think we need to do before we even start talking about this is we need to define what a thorough and uniform education is. So there's some legislators that feel like that's just reading and writing and math. And then there's some that think that should go on, and I'm in that camp. I think that it takes a higher degree after 12 through K to be good in this new world. So I kind of lean on that side. Anyway, that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Representative Manwaring, please, you're next.
Yeah, so I think the first question was about supporting the majority of Idaho families who have their kids in public schools. And I do support public schools and Idaho families, and we do have that mandate in Article 9 of our Constitution for general, uniform, and thorough system of public education. And we're going to follow that mandate. We can't not follow that. There are opportunities, I think, to fund things that empower parents, and this question, or the background of this question, referenced the Empowering Parents Grant Program, and there was a potential, or could be a potential expansion of that program again. And some have called that, an ESA, or a version of an ESA, and that's a debate we're going to continue to have. I think we can do both in Idaho, right? I think we are at a point where we can fund public education, but also consider other options that a significant portion of our Idaho families are pursuing. So I'm just trying to accept the reality that I see in the current legislature. We can fight against the ESAs. And I think there's terrible types of ESAs out there and bad ways to do it. But I also think that Idaho can do this the right way. And I think that we can continue to fully fund public education and have a debate and see if there are ways to do this, whether it's through a tax credit or some other vehicle. We will have that debate, and it's going to be a very forefront and center part of this upcoming legislative session. But I do think the things that we have done the last couple of sessions, also in particular, we've legislated to empower parents and families and parental choice in education already. We've made boards and programs where parents can participate in educational choice. We've expanded the options for parents to choose which schools in a public school system they can go to. So we've taken some significant steps to go down that path, but we'll see where this debate goes this session.
Okay, thank you so much. Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking on the parental rights and education issues, I respect Representative Manwaring, but I will disagree with him. I don't think that we can effectively fund two systems. We either choose to follow our state constitution and fund our public education system appropriately, or we choose to provide a system, a two-level system, a segregated system, in essence, that would poorly fund two separate systems. And I think a majority of the education savings accounts or the voucher systems would be utilized for religious institutions in their education systems, which is, again, that goes against the state's constitution that clearly points out that no state funds should be used for secular education systems. So I think that we need to focus on our public education system, which surprisingly, even though it's on the lower end of the funding rate, does fairly well. We have really good teachers in place, and they make effective systems that they're able to teach our students with. And I think that we need to stick with funding that system appropriately.
Great, thank you so much. Senator Ruchti.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Representative Roberts. I think any form of ESAs, whether it's a tax credit or any other form, is flawed for this main reason. It does not provide accountability of the taxpayer money that's spent. The Idaho Constitution, I think we're all aware of this. It says it shall be the duty of the legislature of Idaho to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public, free, common schools. What we often forget, we don't mention, is that the lead-in to that sentence is the stability of a Republican form of government depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people. It shall be the duty of the legislature to provide that system. That's critical. The framers understood that if we were going to have a functioning republic, that we needed to have a school system that the legislature properly and thoroughly properly funded, so that we could educate our children for generations in this state. And the voucher system is going to remove money from that system, send it to private schools, religious schools, and home schools. There will be no accountability of how those funds are spent, and it will make it so that the two systems compete against each other for tax dollars. It is a recipe for failure and destruction of the Idaho public education system.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we're on to our second question, which has to do with voting rights in Idaho. Currently, Idahoans enjoy a variety of voting rights. The legislature passed restrictive laws that limit the ability of students, nursing home residents, and disabled citizens to vote. The Idaho League of Women Voters has initiated litigation to protect the rights of these disenfranchised voters. Two-part question. What changes do you support to the current voting laws? How will you ensure voting rights for all citizens? How will you ensure that the voting rights of all citizens are protected? Oh, and let's start with Representative Garner.
Yes, I gotta start by saying that I feel like our county clerks do a wonderful job in the elections. I think they make sure that they're fair, and I think they are always watching for fraud and things like that. I like the way the elections are ran now. Some of the proposals that came last year worry me because the rural districts have a hard time getting their seniors out to vote and are very dependent on those absentee ballots or the mail-in ballots. And I can see, I'd rather have more voter participation than less. And I don't feel like the county clerks are letting fraud slip by. They especially in those rural communities, they know they do a wonderful job. They know who's when they sign their name or they know see the person, they know who they are. It's not as anyway. So I would just protect the ones in the service and the rural voters that need those absentee ballots. And I think we're doing a great job here in Idaho.
Hey, great. Thank you so much. Representative Manwaring.
Yeah, so this question's a good one because I mean voting rights are, I mean, that's a fundamental right for our citizens to have the right to participate in free, fair, and protected, secure elections. And I think we do have that system in Idaho, as Representative Garner touched on. We have a really excellent Secretary of State's office and county clerks, and the way that our elections are administered, the system works really well. We have a lot of options for voting through mail, same day, absentee, ballot box, early voting, signed affidavits on election day. We have a lot of options right now currently, and Idaho has always been frankly has been a leader in a lot of options for voting. And so I think personally, I'll continue to support all of those options at Idaho. I think we ought to make voting easy for the voters, but it has to be secure and fair. And so I'll continue to support that. I don't know exactly what will come this session. I do know that we are always looking for ways to make sure we're providing that public confidence. House Bill 1 this last session, we introduced right off the bat, and that dealt with providing improved auditing post-election. So anything that we can do to provide that public confidence, I'll be supporting.
Great, thank you. Representative Roberts.
You know, I agree with Representative Manwaring in this case. Idaho's election system is very, very good. It's very secure. Our county clerks do an excellent job, as does our Secretary of State, in providing for the opportunity for all Idahoans to participate in our elections. And really, this question about voting rights only comes up because a lunatic fringe has been very vocal about the idea that the previous presidential election had some high levels of election fraud or voter fraud, which has been proven time and time again to not be true. So, this has become an issue because, in essence, of a book of lies being written. And I think that we can continue with our current system. Yes, the student ID issue has come up. I don't know that we can have an actual voice in changing that too much. it did not affect a large number of voters in this particular instance with student IDs. But I agree with Representative Garner that when people sign up for their voting rights in the state of Idaho, we're well identified and well tracked by the Secretary of State and by our county clerks. And I think that we should continue to protect the current system that we have here in Idaho on elections, and tell people the truth about how the system works and that it's very secure and it works very well.
Great, thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think the things that have been said so far by our legislators are totally accurate. First you have to have a system that people have faith in. And part of that is those who run the system need to be willing to open up the books, so to speak, let the public in to see how it works, not be afraid to show even when mistakes are made, because it's a human-run system. Although we do use technology, it's still at the end of the day a human-run system, so mistakes will be made. But it's important that that we're open about that system so citizens know, yeah, it works well. And I've sat in on recounts. I've sat in on, day of voting. I know how the system works. I've always had faith in it because of the people running it. Julie Hancock, our local Bannock County elections clerk, just does a phenomenal job with her staff. Phil McGrain is our Secretary of State. I have a lot of faith in Secretary McGrain. He's trying to run a system that people can have faith in. Now, part of our responsibility as legislators is to push back against false claims that are being made in an effort to weaken people's faith in the election system. Nothing could be more detrimental to a free society, a democracy like ours, than losing faith in the election system. So when those false claims come up, we have to push back on them. And we've heard many of them as justification for legislation that would restrict voting. Thus far, by and large, I think we've done a good job of working through those. There's some legislation that's passed that I didn't like, but for the most part, I think we've rejected those false claims.
Hey, thank you so much. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, there will always be election bills coming up, and this year will be no different, I suppose. But because those election bills will go through the State Affairs Committee that I chair, I will have some discretion on what gets heard. So I suppose that's at least something there. In addition, I work very closely with our Secretary of State, Phil McGrain, who is very smart and well-versed in election law and has been a big help in screening problematic policy. I think we need to avoid unnecessary restrictions that compromise certain demographics, while at the same time making sure elections are fair, secure, and can be trusted. And with this issue, I think in particular, it'll require more defense than offense this year.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're on to question number 3 about climate change. A 2020 Nature Conservancy poll showed 70% of Idahoans understand that climate change is here today. The federal government has earmarked $27 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act to create good-paying jobs that address climate change. Which job-creating strategies will you support or champion in the upcoming legislative session? Explain your choices and how it will benefit Idaho citizens. And we'll start this time with Representative Manwaring.
So if I understand the question, it's mostly about clean energy and jobs and the tie with all the federal funding that's available. I just want to focus in on what Idaho currently has and what the opportunities may be. We currently have the Idaho National Lab, and we have the opportunity to continue to develop nuclear energy and small modular reactors and continued developments in nuclear technology. And I think we should be all in Idaho in supporting that technology. I also think when it comes to clean energy, it should be all of the above approach, from nuclear to hydro, solar, wind. I think it's an all-in approach. We should be doing all of the above and supporting that. I think when it comes to jobs in Idaho, I think there are maybe potentially ways that we can incentivize funding streams. We did that for semiconductor manufacturing, for example. I mean, potentially we could consider doing that in this industry in particular, but that needs to be industry driven. They need to come to us generally and say, we're going to create this many jobs, and here's what it would take for us to come to Idaho. That's generally how those conversations get started with the Department of Commerce. We have several opportunities and funding mechanisms through the Department of Commerce already. We have the Idaho Opportunity Fund. That's for public infrastructure. We have a tax incentive. We have a tax credit program, and we have what we call the Idaho Business Advantage program, that if you can commit to investing a certain amount in Idaho, you can get that credit. So there are some existing funding mechanisms that I think could be taken advantage of by companies in these sectors if they pursue them already. But I think we just need to look for ways to do an all above approach and make sure we're continuing to support what we currently have in Idaho, and continuing to look for ways to increase support at the state level, just to recognize that we do want to have a clean environment. And I think we do have that. And we're going to continue to look for ways to promote and make sure the public understands what we have.
Cool. Thank you so much. Representative Roberts.
Well, there's in Dustin Manwaring, I'm sorry, Representative Manwaring was correct. We have a number of methods currently to support clean energy jobs in our state. The difficulty is, that there are many opportunities, many methods, and I think that we could find a way to bring that together into possibly one body, whether that be an infrastructure bank of some sort, that would allow for a single entity to be able to provide funding sources and monitoring that funding as it goes out and it's being utilized. The other issue that we have really is providing a workforce that can do these jobs. And, that's one of the things that Idaho Launch has worked on or is working on, to provide an educated workforce for these jobs. And I think that's an important thing that we can continue to support. There's many methods that we could approach the climate change issue with, but really the first thing starts with the conversations in the legislature, realizing that it is an issue that we need to address, that it is currently affecting the state of Idaho and our world, and that we do have an opportunity to address this issue here through our legislature and support our citizens in providing a future for our children on this planet. And so it really starts with the conversations within the building and just talking to one another and finding the ideas that are going to work out best for us.
Nice. Thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Yeah, I agree with Representative Roberts. First of all, I think it begins with a recognition that we really do have climate change. Our summers are hotter. Their fires are burning hotter in the summer. The weather is more unpredictable. We see it all around us. We see it all over the world. The data supports, the science supports it. Yeah, here's our problem in Idaho and the Idaho legislature, to the extent that we want to follow what other states are doing in setting up climate change policy. We don't have those conversations because climate change is such a loaded term in that body, in that building. And so some really important conversations just aren't happening because it feels very much like anything that comes from those conversations is going nowhere when it comes to legislation and policy. And I know that probably is disappointing to some of the people listening, and it should be disappointing. But when those conversations aren't going to go anywhere, And there are still plenty of problems to focus on for the state of Idaho. Legislators turn their attention to the problems we are going to talk about and try to fix. And we're fighting a lot of bad legislation, as Senator Guthrie mentioned. So, sometimes you do defense. So that's the reality. We have some phenomenal opportunities. And we are doing some things. I mean, we are CTE programs that are improving. The launch program, I think, is going to train a workforce that can take advantage of these opportunities. I wish we had more opportunities for clean energy right here in the state of Idaho, that those kids could go, work in those industries.
Hey, thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, you mentioned in your question green banks, and as I understand them, they're mostly a product of the private sector, who then can leverage additional private and public funding. And I think that we could pass legislation to enact the structure and the nexus to federal dollars through the green bank concept. But I'd want to see the specifics on that before I could committing to any kind of support, because I do have some concerns. We talk about electric and solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, nuclear, and all other kinds of energy, but they all have a carbon footprint, either directly or indirectly, and an environmental impact. And I think we need to have an honest discussion about that, and not just tout being green and clean because we might drive a Tesla or have solar panels on our roof. Those electrons and that infrastructure that's needed to convey those electrons are not without consequence or impact to our environment. Unfortunately, and James talked about this a little bit, the term climate change has become a political litmus test. If you concur, then you're cast as a flaming liberal. If you say that it doesn't exist, you're cast as being unaware, uncaring, conservative. But that said, in the spirit of fairness, I too am concerned about the climate fluctuations and troubling weather patterns we're seeing. So yes, we must continue to do better, but our steps to mitigate these concerns must be reasonable, not radical.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Garner. Garner.
Yes, I think we all agree that it's a problem and that we're going to have to start looking at it eventually, sooner more than later. The big problem, the concern I have is that we need to make sure it's economically feasible and that we're not making a bigger carbon footprint by trying to fix the problem than what the problem was. When we toured the INL out there, and they showed us a machine that they developed that would separate garbage for recycling down to like 98% efficiency. Anyway, it was amazing to watch it work. And we just need a business to pick that up and run with it. But then you have logistic problems. Bannock County's done a great job of taking glass down to Ogden to get recycled, and then they bring salt back for the winter roads, and that's the only way that would work. Otherwise, you've got a bigger cost taking the glass down there and coming back empty. So we need to look for solutions like that that are helping the whole thing and that doesn't create a bigger problem. I hate to even throw it out there, but there's kind of inconsistencies on it because we all agree that hydroelectricity is the best and that there's still that big push to take out the lower snake dams, and which I can't even fathom the size of the carbon footprint if they take those dams out that the railroads or the shipping of the product's going to make. And so it's kind of I sometimes feel like the federal government's talking tongue in cheek because they say that they want this and then they do something like that. So we'd have to be very cautious at how we proceed, and I'd want to see everything. But if it's economical, I would definitely support it.
Cool. Very nice. Thank you. All right. We are on to question number 4, maternal mortality, about the Maternal Mortality Review Committee and a little bit beyond that. Idaho has one of the most restrictive and punitive reproductive health care policies in the country. This caused an exodus of the very experts who can best prevent infant and maternal mortality, which have increased a staggering 18 and 122% respectively. The result has been a creation of maternity care deserts in 13 of Idaho's 44 counties. Last year, the Maternal Mortality Review Committee was dissolved. Two-part question. Do you support the reinstatement of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee? And what measures do you propose to improve the healthcare services for women and infants, including Idaho's abortion laws? Let's start with Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Yeah, serving on the Health and Welfare Committee, I was highly disturbed when we chose to dissolve the Maternal Mortality Review Committee. That was a no-cost issue. It was funded by the federal government with $10,000, and everybody that worked on that committee volunteered on that committee, but it allowed, the committee was forming the committee allowed them to collect the data that they needed to collect while maintaining the HIPAA rules, keeping the data private and reviewing that information, and then being able to provide a direction that we could go in the state of Idaho. But the choice was made. I voted in favor of continuing the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, but as I recall, it died in committee at that point. I think that there will be a move to return that committee back into place, and I'm hoping that it will do what we need it to do. And of course, one of the other issues was the postpartum Medicaid coverage that, again, I don't recall that it was ever really brought up in our committee to be brought to the floor at all. And I think that that's something that we need to address. Our Medicaid system, yes, it's a $4.5 billion budget. But really, when you look at it, that's an investment in our state, in the people at the bottom of our socioeconomic ladder. And if we can increase their status by providing 12 months of maternal coverage postpartum, I think that that would greatly enhance our state success in providing health care for mothers and children. And I think that that's a very important issue that we need to bring up during this session.
Thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Well, first of all, I do support the reinstatement of Maternal Mortality Review Committee. Anyway, we should reinstate the committee. I think the most important issue we can talk about in this regard, though, is the draconian abortion laws that Idaho has. And it's hard to imagine how restrictive we have made healthcare for women regarding reproductive rights in this state. It's shameful, really. We've gone so far as to allow a rapist's family to sue a doctor who performs an abortion on his rape victim. We don't have any common sense in our healthcare laws regarding reproductive rights for women. And so, like, if we could come up with just some common sense legislation that would provide some exceptions for the life of the mother, the health of the mother, just common sense restrictions, I think that would be a nice step forward. Would I like to go further than that? Absolutely. But at a minimum, we need to do those exceptions to bring our laws out of this draconian state that they're in.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, I'll answer I think the second question first. Yes, I would support the reinstatement of the committee. As far as further comments, oftentimes on different issues, we have a debate about what's perception and what's reality. And I think we have to work on the perception that Idaho has become a state unfriendly with regards to women's health, because it is migrating towards reality. OBGYN docs are leaving the state, and women with problematic pregnancies are left with limited treatment options. And I think if we get to it, we'll discuss this a little further in a future question. But I do believe we can craft a safe working environment for doctors and patients while still recognizing the need to protect the unborn. At a minimum, we need to have protection and respect for doctors and their decision-making as they treat patients, and compassionate consideration for the health of the moms and the victims of rape and incest. And I can tell you, this is a very hot issue that was debated last year a lot. We worked hard to try to get some more friendly language into a bill, and it just has hit a roadblock because of certain personalities in Boise, not all of which are in the legislature, that have a lot of say on this issue. And it has become a little bit of a source of frustration as we try to find a sensible solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Yes, I'll start by saying I would support reinstating the committee. I think they gathered a lot of pertinent facts that were beneficial to more areas than just abortion. As for the health of the women in Idaho, it's concerning that we've got doctors leaving, or doctors that are not sure how to make a decision because of the way the laws are written. And we need to definitely clarify that and do some work on making it more friendly. Any Idaho citizen shouldn't have to leave the state to go get the care they need if it's, if that's their decision for the health of the mother or the baby, I should say. There's certain pregnancies that we know aren't viable, that like one in the tube, and it just, we need to do better. It's frustrating that we have a hard time getting doctors to come to the state, and then when we get doctors here and they love the state and they love what it has to offer, and then they decide to leave because they don't feel like they can practice. And it's a concern. I know that I would want my family to be able to get the best health, reproductive health that they can get. And I think we need to look at it very closely.
Okay, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
So I would support this I'm not on the Health and Welfare Committee, but if it came up for a vote, I would support the reinstatement of the committee. But I think we also need to have a serious debate on the committee's prerogative and the scope of what the committee is studying and doing. That committee found what I think is maybe not that surprising to people, and that the most common causes of death are the mental conditions, suicide, substance abuse, and disorders related to overdose. And I think that's fairly predictable. So aside from whether that committee is reinstated, I think there are some improvements to healthcare and the care of pregnant women and infants that we can pursue. Representative Roberts touched on one of those, the postpartum Medicaid coverage, and increasing the postpartum Medicaid coverage is one potential measure. The other ones that I've heard discussed is subsidizing housing priority for pregnant women, potentially some social service funding. And the other one is expanding access to opioid overdose treatment like naloxone. So I think those are other potential things in particular that we could pursue aside from whether this gets reinstated.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, we're on to question 5, Idaho's groundwater and drinking water. The groundwater quality in Idaho's aquifers is being rapidly degraded by mining or processing, industrial and agricultural chemicals, and unsewered residential areas. Two-part question. How do you propose to keep our drinking water safe from contamination while balancing Idaho's growing pollution-producing industries? And what legislation are you willing to support to keep Idaho's water safe to drink? Let's start with Senator Ruchti.
Thank you. Well, I'll be honest on this one. This was a tough one for me because it is such an important balancing act. We need to maintain clean water for our citizens. We need to maintain access to water for our agricultural industries and other industries that rely heavily on it. I think we need to be cautious about certain industries and maybe even certain types of agricultural products that consume too much water or more water than maybe we can afford. The bottom line is we have to realize water and clean water in particular is a scarce resource and it has to be managed carefully. I always like listening to Senator Guthrie on this issue just because I think he probably knows more than all of us combined on it based on his experience. Anyway, he's one of the voices in the legislature that I listen to in this area.
Hey, thank you. Senator Guthrie.
I think Senator Ruchti put a lot of pressure on me, but I'll do my best to answer it. You know, when we look at our groundwater and quality and drinking water, the regulations and requirements for industry and agriculture are already fairly significant. So I think DEQ has to be a player as far as guidance with what we need to do to further those efforts to promote the safety of our water. One of the big concerns has been the individual septic systems that we're seeing, and there's limited oversight. So in these subdivisions, instead of using community wells and things like that, they're punching individual wells, which each time you punch a hole down in the aquifer, it creates an opportunity for pollution. So I think that's something. I do know that there's legislation that's being considered to regulate those individual wells, which might even require them to have a priority date and be subject to curtailment or some kind of cutbacks. You know, part of the problem is the continuing decline of the East Snake Plains aquifer, which allows the pollution that does make its way into the aquifer all the more consequential in terms of parts per million. You've all heard the phrase, the solution to pollution is dilution. So what we have now is the opposite of that, because the aquifer is declining. It doesn't take as many parts per million to create a problem. And also, when you look at what's happened with the recharge projects that Idaho has spent tens upon tens of millions, and I'm not so sure that we won't find down the road that could potentially contribute to the problem, as we're forcing water out into these areas and it's running into the aquifer at a higher rate than Mother Nature intended. And will that compromise Mother Nature's natural filtration system as that goes into the aquifer? So, you know, and I'm about out of time, but the last thing, you know, we've permitted growth or we've promoted growth to a fault almost. And now we're kind of dealing with the additional people and the pressure on our system, not to mention the drought cycles that we've been in.
Yes, thank you. Representative Garner.
Yeah, Senator Guthrie covered that quite well. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, but it's said that water is the lifeblood of Idaho, and it really is. We use water in Idaho for so many different things, and we're dependent on clean and pure water for the state to thrive and to grow. I have to thank the Women League voters for their education and educating me on this last year. I didn't think there was a big problem, but after the questions last year, I did some looking and I asked a bunch of hard questions to different folks. And I actually found out that there are wells right next to me in my home that are being monitored for high nitrates. And this was concerning to me. So I obviously looked into it even deeper. But I think Senator Guthrie touched on exactly what we need to do. We need to not punch as many holes somehow. And because every time we do that, there is the risk of contaminating the aquifer. And we have to be more diligent to watch where these pollution points of interest are coming from and how they're getting into the groundwater, into the surface water that then gets into the groundwater. It's something that we need to be very diligent on and watch, because like I said, the whole state's economy focuses around the Idaho's water, whether it's farming or recreation, or whether it's just having clean water to drink.
Thank you. Representative Manwaring.
Well, in Southeast Idaho, we have several important industries, and this is a balance between our industries. Our phosphate mining is a large industry in this part of the state, and we're really balancing industry with protecting public resources from that contamination. And I think there are some things that we can do better. A lot of this maybe comes down to following some recommendations from our Department of Water Resources and Idaho Water Resources Board and Department of Environmental Quality and local land use and planning decisions. So when new subdivisions are approved, I mean, are they requiring that they put in community wells? Are they punching those individual wells like we're touched on? I think we can have some greater consistency in how we do some of that going forward. But I just wanted to also touch base on what I think we can do to support to keep Idaho's water safe going forward. And we do have some new infrastructure projects that have actually many over the last couple of years. We put about $60 million more, and much of that came through the American Rescue Plan Act, into water infrastructure projects around the state. We also have continuously appropriated funds in several different areas. We have an ag best management practices fund that we rely on. We have a CAFO, which is those contain animal feeding operations areas in the state where they can improve their areas from contamination and improve the environmental quality and impacts on the soil, water, and air in those areas. We have a Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, which provides loans to municipalities, and Drinking Water Loan Fund. So I think those are areas where the legislature continue to support going forward so that we can continue to stay on top of the appropriate infrastructure and cleanup of our Idaho water.
Thank you. Representative Roberts.
Well, I am amazed at the answers and responses that we've seen here. Obviously, our area is very well represented in this issue. In the questions that were provided by the league, one of the reference materials was the phosphate resource area report that was put out. And that was talking a lot about the industries that I think that some are involved here in Southeast Idaho, specifically phosphate mining and phosphate refining, and how that affects our areas. And I could tell you, one of the benefits of being in the legislature and being a candidate was I was taken on the tour of the mining facilities in southeastern Idaho. And I was amazed at the reclamation projects that they have put into place. They are working very hard to reclaim the older mining systems that they had used previously that created some of the high phosphate issues in the waters, specifically in the Bear County or Bear River area. They've done a really good job at remediating some of those issues. I know that our industries are working to improve their systems to contain their pollution and to treat those before they're released into the environment. And I see that as on the construction side. As an electrician, I've worked in a number of these plants here locally, both in Soda Springs and here in Pocatello. And we have been working on systems, improving their systems to reduce their pollutive actions that they have. And I'm very, very pleased to see that industry is working with the EPA and the DEQ to take care of these issues, to protect our water systems, because they're reliant on those water systems too. So they have to make sure that they're taking care of those, the issues that they've learned about over the many, many years of their existence. So I think we're doing well right now.
Thank you. All right, we are on to question number 6 about criminal justice. Last year, the Idaho Department of Correction housed around 7,600 incarcerated individuals in state-owned prisons, county jails, re-entry centers, and out-of-state facilities. This is a 3% increase over the previous year and is a continually increasing taxpayer burden that costs over $200 million annually. Two-part question. What will you do to reduce the sheer number of incarcerated people in Idaho? And in what ways will you support alternatives to imprisonment? We'll start this question with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. You know, a few years ago, there was a study that discovered Idaho was one of the worst states in the union for not processing offenders timely, which resulted in continued imprisonment when they should have been out on parole or some other form of supervised work release program. You know, in addition, you'll hear some discussion this year about mandatory minimums, but that can be a double-edged sword as well, because in some cases they can contribute to the problem. It actually, in some events, can take away the discretion of a judge and result in some sentences being longer than maybe what the judge felt like they should be. A few years ago, there were some code changes that moved several misdemeanors and they were reduced to infractions. And the thought was to reduce those numbers of prison times, prison days that would happen. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if anybody could quantify that because we don't know what it would look like had we not done those changes. There's a lot of programs right now, and I do have some concerns, and I see this a lot where I worry that there's unnecessary overlap, redundancy, and dilution of an effort. So that's something to watch a little bit. We can't always just create a new problem and feel like it's going to solve the problem. And in addition, you know, over the past several years, Idaho has stepped up significantly in terms of addressing mental health needs and investment in treatment centers. And certainly law enforcement is going to continue to be critical in making timely arrests and stopping the flow of drugs into the state. And we need to be supportive in their efforts. And with the proliferation of fentanyl, certainly we have additional challenges that are very problematic and life-threatening. The bottom line, of course, we all know drugs are a scourge in our society, and there isn't a silver bullet or we'd already solved the problem, but we must continue working on it.
Thank you so much. Representative Garner.
Yes, Senator Guthrie's right. There's not a silver bullet for all of it. But I think he touched on the issue where we could really have a bigger impact on incarceration than what we realize, and that's mental health. I think the mental health in our judiciary system isn't being approached as well as it could be. I sit on the Judiciary and Rules Committee, and I hear all kinds of stories from both the sheriffs, police chiefs, all the way through the system that says that they have recurring offenders that have mental health problems and that they can't get them the help. And if they do get them the help, that there's no support group to keep them on their medications. And once they get out there on their own, they start thinking they don't need these medications or they stop taking them. So it's recurring secular movement that they keep ending up back in the system. So to me, the obvious way to solve this, or at least a part of it, is to look at the mental health and have some type of support group that once they get the mental health help that they need, that checks in on them weekly and makes sure they're taking their meds and that they aren't showing up at the bar late at night and causing problems that gets them thrown into the system again. And as for keeping the numbers down, let's keep the felons away.
All right, thank you so much. Representative Manwaring.
Well, I think keeping our citizens out of prison really starts early, and I think I can even argue that I can be making that argument back up even into grade school. Frankly, we're talking about drug and substance use prevention, diversionary courts, and Bannock County has really been a good example. What we've done here with our youth crisis center, what we now call the Village. They have a safe teen assessment center there where they can just kind of have an early intervention and one-stop shop to do that. We have our Southeast Idaho Behavioral Crisis Center It's open 24 hours to do those assessments and support, refer people with mental health and substance abuse issues. So we're doing it right here. Back in 2022, I supported House Resolution 18, and that was the support to get the funding for the $12 million new reentry center that we're going to have in Bannock County through the Idaho Department of Corrections. That's a up to 100-bed facility to support reentry. That will help those inmates who qualify, to help connect them to jobs and resources and help them succeed upon their release, under supervision and, of course, with accountability. And I think that's important. So reentry centers, programs, workforce training, there can be potentially even more prison entrepreneurship programs that I think could be introduced, and mental health treatment, but we're doing it right. And I think we're one of the bright examples here in Bannock County.
Nice, thank you. Representative Roberts.
Yeah, I agree. The assessment center, the village is a bright light to help our youth in our area, to help divert them from the Department of Corrections. But really, the issue is multi-level. Our judicial caseload is tremendous. The judges are frankly underpaid. This last session, we did create a new state defense, public defense office that may help address some of this issue, take the load off of the counties and locals when it comes to providing help for those in the judicial system. We don't have enough corrections officers. There's always an opening. We need more parole officers. We need to provide, we need to invest in this system so that those that are in the system aren't just caged up and and left to suffer through their sentence. We need to provide a way that provides opportunity for them once they do get out of prison or out of jail, and help to deflect them from the recidivism that we see. Yes, it is a mental health issue, but frankly, the best cure for some of the issues that I think that we have is providing opportunity for people. And, as Representative Manwaring had pointed out, it starts early. That means education. Providing a thorough education for our kids is going to go a long ways in providing opportunity for their future. And when somebody has a bright future, they're less likely to be involved in the judicial system. So there's so many levels that we need to address this at, and investment is one in the Department of Corrections there.
Thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The most important thing we could do is invest the resources early on in people's lives, while they're in grade school, junior high, high school, because by the time they get into the criminal justice system, to some extent, the battle has been lost, unfortunately. That's not to say that people can't change and turn themselves around, but there's a lot of examples of people who, once they get in, they go in and out, and that becomes their new reality. So investing in programs for youth to make sure that they stay focused, that they get the training they need so they can go get good jobs, that they have other programs that keep them out of trouble. That's really important, that they have support systems. We need to support law enforcement with resources, make sure they have properly trained law enforcement officers. We should invest in specialty courts, mental health programs. That's been talked about. Use best practices on providing rehabilitation and preventing recidivism. But one of the big issues that comes up from time to time are these mandatory minimums. In the 90s, a lot of states started doing mandatory minimums. 3 strikes, you're out. Idaho did, and we lived to regret it because our prison populations were bursting at the seams. We were having to house prisoners out of state, which created all kinds of problems. We We, dabbled in private prisons, which created all kinds of problems. So we need to be really careful about how we punish those who've broken the law, and especially about implementing any new mandatory minimums. And we should look at the mandatory minimums we have and determine whether they're still appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. We are up to the 7th question, which is about education facilities, funding, and property taxes. Recently, the Pocatello Chubbuck School District bond for school construction and improvement failed. School districts across the state must turn to voters to help fill the gap between local operating costs and government funding. Again, a 2-part question. Do you think the 2/3 majority requirement for school bonds is still appropriate? And how will you address the funding of local schools so that the burden does not fall on local taxpayers? We start with Representative Garner.
Yes, like I mentioned earlier, there's a discrepancy between different districts. Some districts are able to pass their bonds, some aren't. We need to find out why that is. If people in those districts have just lost faith in their public school system, or if there's a underlying reason why they can't. Whether or not I'd support lowering the 2/3 vote on the bonds, I'd have to see how that was presented and in what legislation it came forward in. I do think we need to better fund our education system. I think we did a great step forward last year. I still think we have ways to go. The plant and facilities is a nice way to approach that, I think, because it gives relief to the property tax payers also. Sitting on the education committee, it was very concerning last year. They gave a report of the building maintenance and the report on all the buildings over the state of the school facilities. And it was, I can't remember the number, but it was in the millions to bring it back up to where they felt like it should be. Now, I think we can do it cheaper than that. And I think there's ideas floating around on how to do that. I'm thinking that I would like to see a fund that just directed money towards just building maintenance, that the state put some type of revenue in that could grow, kind of like they did in 219, but just a fund for just buildings. And but we do need to work on it. It is a serious problem across the state. We've got well, you've mentioned it. Some districts just cannot pass a bond.
Okay, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
So I do believe that tax increases, especially at the ballot, should be difficult. I do understand the reality that districts are having a hard time. And here in our school district here, obviously we had a failed attempt at a bond recently here where a majority supported it, but they didn't reach that 2/3 threshold. So that's a reality here on the ground in this district. And I get it. There's some other districts that have had even harder times getting those bonds passed. But I think if we can address this in a different direction, and we've started down that path with House Bill 292 and creating the school district facilities fund, where they can pay down some of their debt, reduce property taxes at the same time, and save for future building. If we can expand on that or create another fund that deals with building new facilities or maintaining facilities, and potentially able to bond off that revenue, that continued stream of revenue that comes from the state, potentially we'll get rid of the need for school districts to have to go out and ask for that bond and those supplementals. And so I think I would rather live in that reality, or get to that reality where we get to a point where these districts don't need to go do that at the ballot box, rather than trying to adjust and switch around elections and the threshold. So I think we're going to have some vigorous debate over that this session in particular, and I hope we can take steps towards getting there.
Thank you. Representative Roberts.
Yeah, it was disappointing when that bond failed here in Pocatello. The loss of the gym at Highland High School was a difficult one. When I heard that fire was going, I went up and kind of toured the event, the situation, just to see exactly what was being, what was going to be affected by it. Representative Garner had pointed out that our school facilities, they suffer from a $1 billion deficit in maintenance levels. And that's been ongoing since the first study that I've seen, I think, was in the late 90s, where that number, it was 900 million, I think, at that point in time. So this has been a multi-decade issue where school facilities are not being maintained appropriately because the funds are so hard to get. And, that was one of the issues that was brought to the state Supreme Court in 2005. And, that say, where the state Supreme Court decided that the legislature is responsible for funding these issues and not putting it on the local voters, because that makes it more difficult for rural communities to be able to fund their education system and their school facilities. And that's where we see some of the worst issues that we have in our schools, with leaking roofs and so forth. So, even our Highland High School issue came from a non-properly functioning fire alarm system. Some of that could have been abated by just a simple fire alarm coming, being set off appropriately. There's so much that we need to do to invest in when it comes to our education system, and that really falls upon the legislature. It shouldn't fall upon local communities alone. I think that we could have a rainy day fund to help address some of these issues too.
Thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Yes, the framers of the Idaho Constitution, they're the ones who set the 2/3 requirement for bonds. Now, keep in mind, you might say, well, then they intended it to be this difficult for communities to build new schools. Well, number one, that requirement was for all kinds of facilities. That was for jails, it was for schools, it was for other facilities. But at the same time, don't forget about Article 9 that we already talked about. The same framers who said 2/3 requirement to build a building also said it shall be the duty of the legislature of Idaho to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public, free, and common schools. And I think they intended or didn't think that an Idaho legislature would put onto the community the responsibility to build these school buildings and to figure out how to pay for it and have to use the bonding process that requires 2/3. Now, I don't know. We can't go back in time to ask them, but it just seems nonsensical to make it so difficult to build a new school in your community. And the legislature has a responsibility for that. As Representative Manwaring pointed out, there's been some creative attempts through our tax policy to try to make it so communities are able to use general fund money so that they can build those buildings. One thing I know, it's not fair for the students at Highland and their families to be required to go to school in what is a subpar building at this point. And there's an entire class of students, even if the bond were to pass the next time it has an opportunity to pass, there's an entire group of kids who are going to be attending school in a subpar facility, having to walk, leave the building and walk down the road and go to classes and other places where they can find a place to do band and other activities. It's just not right. And the legislature has made it even harder for school districts to get this done because we place so many restrictions on what the school district can talk about in helping the community understand the importance of the bond and why it's needed and what we're trying to do with it. So we've
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Senator Guthrie.
I should have yielded some time to Senator Ruchti because by mistake, being the leadoff hitter when we started this thing, I actually answered this question first by mistake because they're both kind of education questions. So I apologize for that, but I just offer a couple additional comments on it. One of the things I've heard is that, we go to all different parts of the state and we design these schools and we try to get maybe fancier, creative or whatever. And one of the ideas is to have a general floor plan for schools that's so we save some on construction and also architectural type costs. That's one idea I've heard. And certainly there's been a push to go back to enrollment rather than average daily attendance, which happened during the pandemic and now it's transitioned back. So we'll see if that gets any traction. And the only comment I'd make on Highland, and it's not meant to be critical, it's just meant to recognize how difficult it is to get a 2/3 vote. I think that the timing was unfortunate for Highland because had that election been right after the fire, I think the community would have rallied to that vote and passed it. And I think the other thing is when they combined some other projects with that bond, I think it compromised its ability to pass. And that's maybe a lesson learned for the future, but I think that maybe could have hurt it as well. But it's like I've said before, you could have a room full of people and ask how many liked apple pie, and you may not even get 2/3 for something like that. So it's a pretty tough threshold. And that's why I've said before, if we can move it to a general election, we have the good voter turnout, then I'm in one that believes we could lower that threshold.
Thank you. So we are coming to the end of our time. It's 8:21. Would you like to answer one more question just for 1 minute each? This is about the presidential primary process. What do you think? 1 minute? I'm getting some why not? All right, let's just do this for 1 minute. Okay, earlier this year, the legislature inadvertently eliminated the presidential primary election in Idaho. As a result, Idahoans will have to attend a presidential nominating caucus if they want to pick their political party's nominee for president. First part, do you support the reinstatement of the presidential primary so this does not happen again? And secondly, how do you propose to unify the legislature in order to come to a consensus on this issue? So you have 1 minute, starting with Representative Manwaring.
Well, this is a fun question to end on, but it's going to be interesting to see how fun the caucuses are coming up in March. And that's going to be telling. But yes, I support the reinstatement of the presidential primary, but I only do so if we're doing the presidential primary on the same date as all of the primary elections. I don't support having that be a separate paid for election. And that was why I supported and sponsored the bill to get rid of the presidential primary and paying for that as a separate election date when we eliminated that date for school bonds and levies and all other elections. And so if we're going to reinstate that, I'm in favor of doing it on any date where we do all other primary elections. We're going to have to see again what happens this March with these caucuses, and I think we'll have to follow that public sentiment. And I think that public sentiment will help support us to get it changed or keep us stalled out. But I think that's kind of where we're at now. I think we'll see some attempts this session, but I really think now we're in a point where we have to watch and see what happens.
Hey, thank you. Representative Roberts.
Difficulties with my mute button. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we should return to the presidential primaries and keep them on the same date as all other primaries. That's a fairly simple result, really. This issue comes about again because a lunatic fringe wants to have ultimate control over the party decisions and rather than allowing the voters to actually make the decisions. Opening the primary process, and that might be a different issue, but unifying the legislature. That's a fun one to talk about. There are large groups of us that can come to a consensus and can work on compromise, but that lunatic fringe works on a no compromise basis. They refuse compromise. They want their way and their way only, and that's what makes it difficult in our legislature. So hopefully we can move forward.
Thank you. Senator Ruchti.
Yes, I would support reinstating the presidential primary. In fact, I think I supported Representative Manwaring's version of that bill. And I'm just going to drift over to open primaries and emphasize what Representative Roberts said. Our biggest problem in the state when it comes to our primary system is we don't have open primaries, and we need them. I'm part of the Veterans for Idaho Voters. We're promoting the Open Primaries Initiative. It's extremely important to the state because the majority party has been hijacked by an extreme element. There's some recent, I wouldn't call them studies, but evaluations of the votes of both House and Senate members, and by extreme conservative groups, and they've suggested that the Idaho Senate is dominated by Democrats or liberal thinking legislators, and it's just not true.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
I'm going to be consistent. I also support
Senator Guthrie. All I said was Senator Guthrie is very conservative, and so that was all I was saying.
Anyway, I too support the reinstatement of the presidential primary. Part of the objective to move into March was to make the primary relevant because they felt like it was too late in May. So I would submit that I think that caused having two primaries caused confusion and also voter fatigue. So my solution is to have everything down ticket races in the presidential primary in April. That compromises, it moves it to a kind of a middle ground, and maybe it'll incentivize us legislators to get out of town.
All right, thank you. Representative Garner.
Hey, it's a great question to end on. We're all in consensus. I agree with everything Dustin, everyone said. I would like to bring back the presidential primary, and as long as we have it when the other primaries are being ran so that there's not an additional cost to the state, I think that's the way to go.
All right, nice. Thank you all. That's all the time we have for questions. This evening's forum was recorded. To stream this at another time, it will be available for viewing on YouTube. As Lot Sharfman once said, democracy is not a spectator sport. To that end, the League of Women Voters would like to remind our listeners that your voice matters, and we encourage you to contact your legislators with your comments and questions. The contact information can be found at legislature.idaho.gov. You can find the League of Women Voters of Pocatello on Facebook or on our website at lwvid.org. Sincere thanks to all our legislators for their time, participation, and responses this evening. We also appreciate KISU for airing this live event. And that concludes our forum. Have a great evening.